Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Labour's governing body has been discussing whether a commitment to another EU referendum should be part of its European election manifesto, and if so, under what circumstances. The leadership has been facing pressure from members to back a fresh public vote. Well, our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, is in Westminster. Vicky, like the Tories, Labour has its own problems with Brexit. Has Jeremy Corbyn found a way out?
Well, arguments have been simmering in the Labour Party for months, and they've been accused really of sitting on the fence over Brexit policy to try and keep those two factions together. On the one side, those who say there should be a second referendum in all circumstances. Many of the advocates of that would then campaign to remain in the EU. On the other side, lots of Labour MPs representing heavily Leave constituencies who think it would be a total betrayal of the first referendum result. The big question for Labour, what on earth would they be putting in their manifesto for those European elections? That's what they've thrashed out today after several hours, and really Jeremy Corbyn has got his way by broadly sticking to existing party policy, an existing compromise which says yes, a second referendum, but in limited circumstances, and those are, as they would put it, to prevent a damaging Tory Brexit or to prevent a no-deal Brexit. So what are the chances of a deal? Well, those cross-party talks between Labour and the Conservatives are carrying on. There's more scheduled, but actually government insiders saying that if there's no real progress by the middle of next week, then really they've hit the end of the road.
Vicky, thank you very much.
Now, the Labour Party's Brexit policy for next month's European elections will be to back a second Brexit referendum only if it cannot get the changes it wants to Theresa May's deal or a general election. That policy was decided in a 5-hour meeting of Labour's ruling body, the National Executive Committee, today. Remainers in the party had wanted Jeremy Corbyn to agree to hold a referendum on any deal in all circumstances. But our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has a report now from Westminster. Gary.
Wakey, wakey, Jeremy Corbyn!
Shouting at a different building for a change. Labour's National Executive Committee meeting on the second floor. They listened to each other's arguments for 5 hours before signing off on the draft Jeremy Corbyn wanted for the European Elections Manifesto. Things hadn't moved much at all, despite efforts by some supporters of a second referendum, like the deputy leader of the party, Tom Watson.
We are publishing our European manifesto early next week. You can ask me as many questions as you want, but you'll have to wait till we announce it on the front.
Those in the Labour Party who want a second referendum argue the party risks losing the enthusiasm, if not the membership, of many activists, and losing votes to parties that are more outspokenly pro-Remain. One of those parties today was trying to exploit just that.
Apparently, 22 of the 70 Labour MEP candidates are in favour of a people's vote. Good, but not good enough. Where are the other 48? Every single one of our Change UK candidates supports a people's vote.
But some Labour MPs who represent pro-Leave constituencies worry that the party is already seen as anti-Brexit, and some pro-referendum Labour frontbenchers are in danger of alienating some Labour supporters for good.
You've got members of the shadow cabinet who are openly supporting a second referendum with really only Remain on the ballot, and that does make people who voted to leave in constituencies like mine very, very angry.
It will hurt Labour badly, you think, in a general election, let alone the ones that are coming up?
I think there is an honest prospect that this could be the final breach of trust with voters who have been moving away from the Labour Party for some time in towns like mine, but who now feel that they have been completely not just let down but actually disrespected through this process.
It now looks as though efforts to get an agreement between the Labour and Conservative frontbench teams on a Brexit deal will intensify in the coming days. At Cabinet today, 3 ministers protested to the Prime Minister that they thought the Conservative family could still come together and itself deliver the Brexit deal without Labour help. Penny Mordaunt, Andrea Leadsom and Liam Fox were firmly told by the Chief Whip that wasn't realistic. That, some Tories think, could mean an awkward moment for the Labour leader.
See you all, thank you.
He's offered pretty much all he's asking for from the Tories on Brexit. Others think Jeremy Corbyn, all too aware of the divisions within Labour, will find a way to reject any offer.
You need to speak up for the people.
But Theresa May looks like she might be playing her last card. Her chief whip told the cabinet those who thought Brexit could be got through on Tory MPs' votes were simply hiding under the duvet.
Our political editor Gary Gibbon there with that report. I can now speak to two Labour Party MPs. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Labour's Shadow Business Minister, Barry Gardiner, who was in that NEC meeting today. But first, let's go to Melanie On, who has been... Oh, he's shaking his head, so perhaps he wasn't. We'll find that out when we get to it. She's on the campaign trail in her constituency in Grimsby today. Melanie On, what have you found on the doorsteps of Grimsby today? You've been hard at it.
Good evening, John. There are two main issues that people have been talking to me about. The first is a very local issue around recycling rates and people very keen to get new recycling bins. But the second, of course, is Brexit, and everybody wants to talk to me about that, knowing when exactly it's going to happen and why it's taken nearly 3 years to get to a position where the deadline of the 29th of March has been and gone, and nobody really knows what's happening now.
So what do they make of your party wrangling about whether to have another referendum?
To be honest, that isn't getting a great deal of cut through with the people that I've spoken to today. I know that that will be all the talk in London and in Westminster circles, but out here on the doorstep, it is very much about the big Brexit issue. Why hasn't it happened yet? And I heard that piece from Lisa Nandy earlier in the programme, and I think that she's right. People are feeling very frustrated that their views are being ignored, and I know that my constituency is extraordinary in some respects because it was such a high leave vote, and that isn't the case across the whole of the country. However, people overall did marginally vote to leave, and they expected to see some progress. And at the moment, it feels very much like it's a plague on all of your houses for not getting our act together. And I would say the Prime Minister should have reached out earlier to the Labour Party to try and reach an accommodation much earlier than she did do. And this is her timetable that has failed. However, they don't understand why political parties and representatives can't sit down like grown-ups and reach an accommodation.
Well, now, I mean, do you find, contrasting today with when you first set out on the original Brexit campaign, I mean, do you find people are clearer about the issues, really understand what it's all about, and have any of them at all adjusted their views?
I don't think that anybody that I've spoken to over the last few weeks or even the last few months have changed their views at all. They have, if anything, become more entrenched. Particularly people who were very passionate on both sides of that debate. However, for those who were slightly more ambivalent, and perhaps it was a finer balance about how they chose to vote in that referendum, they very much feel like they recognise that the referendum did not go in their favour, those Remain voters, and so think, well, then it is the government's responsibility to get on with this and deliver a deal in the best way possible.
And what happens to you now? Because, I mean, you were, I think, originally a Remainer?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I'm very clear with my constituents that I campaigned for Remain, that I voted for Remain, that, you know, if it comes up again, which I very much hope that it doesn't, that I would probably still be in a position where I say, on balance, I personally still think that it is better to remain. However, I recognise that 70% of people in this borough and in my constituency voted to leave, and we asked them what it was that they wanted us to do. And although I am not mandated by my constituents, I do recognise that when we ask them a question, and they tell us what it is that we should do, that their views do deserve to be represented, and that's what I hope I've been doing in Parliament.
Melanie On, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Grimsby. Well, now turning to Barry Gardiner, who in fact is Shadow Trade Minister and was not in the NEC meeting, but attended the Shadow Cabinet. What do you make of this fudge tonight? I mean, it seems you're having a Betty both ways job.
Well, look, John, can I actually, first of all, congratulate Channel 4? That, I think, is the most balanced piece reporting on Brexit and this whole debate that I've heard in a very long time, because you've presented both sides. I think you've tried to present both sides very fairly. And the really extraordinary thing about these coming elections is that there is only one party who will be going into those elections trying to appeal to both sides of our population, whether they were Leave or Remain. And what we're saying is, look, we were a Remain party, we campaigned to Remain, but when that democratic decision was taken, as Democrats, we said, okay, we made you a promise. That was a promise that we committed ourselves to in our manifesto. We then said that we would try and deliver on that result. We made certain reservations on that, and that was we would not go for a no deal, and that we would certainly not go for a bad Brexit such as the one that's been criticised on all wings of the political parties right across Parliament, which is Theresa May's deal. And that's why we're in there now at the moment trying to negotiate with the government, and Melanie On put it so brilliantly when she said, look, she should have been doing this, the Prime Minister should have been doing this, 2 years ago, recognising the division that there is in our society and trying to heal it, trying to reconcile it. And that's why she should have reached out to the Labour Party and to the opposition, 2 years ago, so we could try and create a compromise that, let's say, 80% of the population would say, look, it may not be perfect, it may not be exactly what I want, but I can live with this.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you look like a push-me-pull-me party.
No,
I mean,
John, we
in
don't.
the face of the very strident Nigel Farage and the forces that are absolutely determined to push ahead with whatever Brexit they can get, you seem to be sort of, very indistinct tonight.
Well, no, I reject that entirely, because the vision that Nigel Farage has is of a no-deal Brexit, a deregulated Brexit, where we would go on to the disaster that would be World Trade Organization terms. What we said is quite clear, and that is we will respect the referendum result. We should leave the European Union, but we should do it in a way that protects jobs, protects standards of the environmental standards and rights, protections in the workplace for people, and in a way that enables our just-in-time supply chain to continue.
We have very little time, and what you do seem to be saying is that you will have a referendum if there isn't a deal, and you will have a referendum if you can't get anything else. It's a kind of backstop.
Well, actually, John, let me refer you back to September last year. You were at the party conference, I think, where Labour came out after 6 hours of negotiation with that compromise. And everybody at the time hailed that compromise as really grown-up politics. Because what we said is, look, we will abide by the promises that we've made to the public. Promises to try and deliver on the referendum result, but equally promises that we will not undermine people's well-being. And that's what we're continuing to do. So if we can get that deal, we will. If we can't, then we'll go for a public vote.
We must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
To domestic news now, and if you've been anxiously awaiting the results of Labour's position on a second vote, here's what they gave us. The party's ruling National Executive Committee has agreed its manifesto for the European elections will back another Brexit referendum, but only in specific circumstances. It was a 5-hour meeting which ended with an agreement to uphold the existing Labour policy. Nick Watt is here to talk us through it. Nick, should those who were expecting to hear of a second referendum be left feeling happy?
Well, it's really a case of Jeremy Corbyn 1, Tom Watson 0. Tom Watson wanted a referendum in all circumstances. Jeremy Corbyn wanted to stick to that party policy, as you were saying, which is a referendum in more limited circumstances. That's if you only have a Tory deal on the table. So he upheld that, but it appears that you can sort of read into it what you want, really. So Gloria De Piero, who's a Remain supporter who represents a Leave constituency, quoting from the Politics Home website report of that meeting, she said Labour's manifesto for the European Parliament will not contain a pledge to hold a second Brexit referendum. The party's ruling National Executive Committee agreed that another nationwide poll should only be an option if it cannot force a general election. But Wes Streeting, who's a passionate Remainer, he then tweeted, glad the NEC has made the right call and confirmed that a public vote will be in our manifesto for the European elections. We're a party for Remain, and it's right that everyone, Leavers and Remainers, should be given the final say on our Brexit future. Now, one former Labour minister said to me, that sounds like the language of doublespeak, it's fudge. But it is important to say that Remainers are much more uneasy tonight, and interestingly, Wes Streeting later on retweeted David Lammy, the Labour MP for Tottenham, saying that the party needs to go much, much further in the direction of a referendum.
Just talk us through where the Brexit talks are now.
Well, Theresa May would like to sort of conclude these talks by next week, the middle of next week, and there's been sort of positive signs from both the Labour and the government sides. So that means that if there is a deal, then that would be a deal on the legislation, as we were saying last night, to get us out of the EU by the end of June. If there isn't a deal, then Theresa May would like to have some sort of votes on various Brexit options. I do have to say there is deep suspicion amongst Brexiteers in the cabinet about what's going on. One Leave source said to me they think either the two parties are talking absolute rubbish about there being progress because they want to stall to get over the local elections, or something is going on and they are really worried that in those circumstances Theresa May would, as I was told, cave on a customs union.
Nick, briefly then, looking ahead to the European elections, would Labour call itself a party of Remain then at this point? Absolutely not.
Well, it depends what wing you're in. If you're in the Tom Watson wing, he would want to portray it as a Remain party because he fears greatly that if the party is seen to be the party of soft Brexit, then lots of other Labour MPs could join Change UK. Jeremy Corbyn, a lifelong Eurosceptic, he believes that the party must deliver Brexit, but it's a Brexit, he would say, that would hug the UK very close to the European Union.
Nick, thanks very much indeed.
Yeah.